Good evening, folks. I hope you had a wonderful weekend. Welcome to the third installment of the Mustang Hockey Hot Stove Series. We have another outstanding guest this evening. Just a quick note before we get going. I just wanted to thank all the viewers who have touched base with either myself or Ryan or members of the Seventh Man Committee with feedback regarding the show so far. Very much appreciated. Sounds like everybody's really enjoyed the two guests we've had previously. So another wonderful one tonight. Ryan, again, will be our amazing host and doing so many things on the back end, not just the interviewing, but obviously running the tech side for us here. Anybody who knows me knows that is not one of my strengths. So I want to thank Ryan for everything he's doing. And I'm very, very pleased tonight to welcome a good friend, somebody that I've known for approximately 30 years, which I think ages both of us, unfortunately. But our guest tonight is Steve Bowman. Steve is the head amateur scout for the Washington Capitals, or as he so refers to it, the grand poobah of scouting. Steve has been in his position for 23 years. The last 9 or 10 is actually the head scout, and his career obviously done a lot of wonderful things, but probably highlighted by the 2018 Washington Capitals Stanley Cup championship, where they beat the Vegas Golden Knights. So obviously the pinnacle of anybody's career, doesn't matter whether you're in player or management or part of the staff. So wonderful he's been able to have that experience and continue on with a great organization. Steve, as you know, is part of what is one of the all-time iconic hockey families. His uncle, Scotty, legendary coach, Montreal, Pittsburgh, Detroit. His late father, Jack, head scout of the Buffalo Sabres for many years. And his cousin, Stan, a great run, is GM of the Chicago Blackhawks. I think, believe it or not, something like 18 Stanley Cup rings in the family. That's got to be some kind of incredible record. So we're very pleased to welcome Steve to the show tonight and look forward to the conversation he has with Ryan. Just one other brief note. Again, we'll hold the comments and the questions in the chat until the end of the interview, and then feel free to fire away. We'll try to get to as many as we possibly can. So welcome, Steve. Thanks for joining us. And we're very, very lucky. We were trying to schedule this a couple months ago, and Steve knew his schedule would be starting around March 1st, and we're lucky to have him tonight because I believe he heads out on his first scouting trip on Friday. So great, and welcome to the Hot Stove. Steve, you and Ryan, take it away.
Thanks a lot, Clark. And we'll, as I always make the joke, now Clark is going to go run everything on the other side and make sure everybody's behaving themselves and so on and so forth. So thanks so much again, Steve, for doing this. I know, first and foremost, I have to make mention, I am an Oak Ridge graduate, and I know you're a passionate Oak Ridge.
I am. Proud of the Oaks. First hockey championship in 47 years last year. So
absolutely.
That was a top 3 achievement in my life, actually, quite honestly. So, yeah.
I was never as much as I love talking hockey, I realized at about 7 years old that the dream of actually playing at a decent level probably consisted of me maybe being a part of a broadcast team. So once I realized that I talked better than I played, obviously things went a little sideways that way.
Yeah.
Really excited to have you here tonight, just to kind of chat a little bit about obviously your career. We'll talk a little bit about your career, your team, obviously, how things are going this year, all the craziness of this year, what the lifestyle is like for a scout. Obviously, that's something that I know over the years people have said to me a multitude of times, that you guys aren't looking for the appreciation, but you surely aren't appreciated for everything that you guys do. So we'll have a little fun that way. So first things first, take us through, obviously, as Clark said in the intro, what point did you kind of decide that this scouting method and this kind of career as a scout was going to be something that you wanted to kind of jump into?
I was probably in my late 20s when it was something that I kind of thought I was interested in. Like my dad kind of, I grew up around hockey, but when I was graduated from Western, I kind of wanted to try a few other things, and there weren't a lot of jobs. And so I ended up, he always suggested you learn a trade. So I ended up going to chef school in Stratford. I actually lived with Clark's parents for a year. So, that's how far back we go. And because Clark and I knew each other from our days at Western. And so around then I started coaching minor hockey, and I was at a wedding I don't remember whose wedding it was, but Pierre Maguire was there, the guy who's still doing color commentary. And Pierre was the new head coach of the Baton Rouge Kingfish, and he needed some help. And like I said, I was coaching AAA, Bantam hockey, and he said, I need a guy to be an occasional assistant coach, but I really need a guy to scout. And he knew that I knew a lot of scouts because of my dad and friendships with those people, because there's a real camaraderie in the business. And so I came on as basically a staff of one, and I scouted in kind of Michigan, Ontario, and Quebec, because I live in London still. And then I made a few trips with the team, especially when they were up north, and went behind the bench and on the ice for practice. And having done both, I probably could have continued in both, but I kind of thought scouting was a little more stable. And I was lucky at the time. The league went from 21 teams to I think 28. So they added 7 teams in 7 years. So they were looking for qualified people, and it's hard to get in. Like people, it's stable, and guys don't switch teams a lot, and there's not a lot of opportunities, and it's very arbitrary. I work with guys that didn't play junior hockey and came from not a hockey background, but they didn't play in the NHL or American League or whatever, and so I was lucky, and I'd had interviews with a few teams and had a few offers. And a guy named Ross Mahoney, who's still my boss, he's now the assistant GM of our team, had been with Buffalo and worked with my dad, and he had gone to Washington, and Washington had an opening for an Ontario scout because David Poyle, Washington's former GM, had gone to Nashville, and they're taking some scouts with him, like often happens. So it just kind of happened to me. I got to a point where I really wanted to get back in it. I realized I got to appreciate it and got to really sort of feel that this is something I wanted to try to do. And obviously I had a lot of support from my then girlfriend, now wife, kind of Paula. And yeah, it just sort of took off on its own. And, I love it. It's still great. It's still a challenge. I miss being in the rinks. It's been almost a year since I've seen a junior game, but yeah, that's kind of the short story, but that's the details. So. Yeah.
You mentioned, obviously, let's go right to the situation at hand, the last little while sort of thing. And we'll bring up your schedule here that you kind of sent us as an example here in a minute or two. Yeah. But, how strange is it? Because it becomes, and I know I've talked to some other scouts in the past too, especially, and they've said to me that, as soon as the draft ends, the next it winds up again, sort of thing. It's not like you don't take 2 weeks in Waikiki afterwards and sit at the beach. It's just ready to go for the next round. How weird has it been just for your the way you're used to kind of thing? I know everybody's kind of got everything is a little sideways with the way they're used to, but it's definitely got to be a lot different for you guys.
Oh yeah, it's really strange. I mean, there's been some good things that have come out of it. Last year for the draft, we interviewed 100 kids or so for the draft. We'd interview them all on Zoom, and we've got to appreciate Zoom and forums like this, and it's something we'll use going forward. Our scouts really love doing that. They say it's so much better than waiting to talk to a kid after a game, and he's bothered because the coach yelled at him or he turned a puck over or whatever. And you can see people in their home environments and they're more relaxed, and so that's been a benefit. But for me, yeah, I usually see, I don't know, around 250 games a year live, and use video as a sort of a supporting tool. But I find it very difficult. I've watched a ton of video. We have a service that provides us with video from junior and pro leagues around the world, and I watch a lot of it, but there's no context. You struggle because you don't know if a lot of times you don't know if it's a rivalry game because you don't know the two teams in the Czech league, let's say, and you don't know if they played last night, and you don't know the other players in the game. Where if you're at the rink, you can kind of digest a lot of that stuff, and you can watch body language on the bench, and you can kind of get a better sense of when the guy's going to come on the ice again and what situations he's playing in. And so it's just harder to follow the game. I find it really hard to evaluate defensemen because they're often just off the screen, and you can't really tell if they can pivot until they've already pivoted and they've gone to retrieve the puck. And so you can evaluate some decision making, and you can evaluate some skills, but there's skating's hard from the side because usually we tend to sit high up in corners, and I think it's easier to evaluate skating, a guy's stride as he's coming towards you or going the other direction. So there's been lots of differences, and like you said, I am making a trip this week It's the first one. They started playing hockey out west, and they've been playing in the U.S. the whole time. But it's a bit of a hiccup because I have to quarantine if I go there. And I went to the draft. I was at the draft in D.C. and then had to quarantine for 2 weeks. And it was fine, but it was also October, and I was at a cottage, and so it was kind of relaxing. But after about 6 days, I'd had enough. I was going crazy. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. It feels a lot like my first year actually to get out and be in a rink. So
You sent along an example here, and I wanted to bring this up. And this is from a couple years ago, so no trade secrets. Scenario here where we start in July, and some people kind of go, okay, later, but obviously it's
that's actually missing. I was in DC for a big chunk of that, which is not on there because we had our development camp in that window. Yeah, and then there's August, so that's a bunch of camps. That was that year the Lincoln was in Edmonton, so I was there for that. I also went over to Kamloops because they had an under 20 World Junior sort of pre-tryout, so I was there. I often go to Europe in that window too and see a couple of tournaments over there. So yeah, that's it. Yeah, and then it gets crazy. Yeah, this is where. So yeah, if you look at the end of September, there's a bunch of showcases. We were at a rookie tournament in Tampa from the 8th to 11th, but our NHL team, and then I went to a bunch of showcases there on the last 2 weekends, which would have been the North American League and then the USHL Fall Classic. The North American League was in Minnesota, and the USHL one was in Pittsburgh. So yeah, I saw all those games. Didn't always see 3 periods of those games, but it gives you a good kind of base on a lot of guys. So yeah, and this is sort of typical October. Made a trip to Europe on the 10th to watch the Czechs play the Russians, and then went to Germany. I saw Mannheim there. That's where Moritz Seider played, the guy the Wings picked 5th overall. At the time, we thought we were going to have a chance to get him late in the first round. Obviously, we were off a little bit. And then, like October and November and December, there was probably another trip to Europe. They all kind of look sort of similar. Lots of junior hockey in North America, a few games thrown in the U.S. here and there. I try to get a good handle on the OHL first because I find I don't see a lot of it, especially after Christmas. If you skip forward to February, you'll see when it really gets crazy. So in February here, you can kind of see go to March. That was the nutty one. So March is, so I made a trip back to Sweden on the 7th of March to watch some playoffs there. I was over there for about 10 days and then came home, did some Quebec League and OHL till the end of the month. And then if you skip into April, I made I think it was about a 25-day trip to Europe. It started on the 5th. Yeah, I went to Sweden and watched the playoffs. Oh, there's a good story right there. So Lucas Raymond played for, I think it was Färjestad. So what they do in Sweden is they do a Final Four for their under 18 and under 20 leagues. And they play in a little town about an hour from Stockholm, a neat little town. I think it's called Norrköping. So as it turned, you end up with really good players that play with the men all year. But then they send them down to these teams because they want to win the championship for their club. And so then Färjestad's under 18 and under 20 teams both qualified. And Raymond was the kid that Detroit picked 5th overall last year. So on Friday, he played in the under 18 game and they won. And they got to the final and they won that game in overtime. And then he came back out on the ice, changed his socks because they were wearing red shirts instead of white. And he played in the under 20 game. And that went into overtime. So he played 8 consecutive periods of hockey in one day. And he was the best player on the ice in both games, even with the under 20 guys, and then played in the under 20 final the next day, but they lost. He was a bit out of gas. But so that's just a little bit of a difference than what we have here. And then I stayed over there. I went to France to watch the under 18 B pool. There wasn't a lot of players for this year there, but that's Tim Stutzel, the player, and John Jacob Paterka, or John Jason, or whatever. Those guys all played for the Germans as underages, so that had value. And then I went from there to the World U18 Championships. But the crazy part about it is, on the first, I drove to the second. I drove to Waterloo, Iowa, to watch one game, Sioux City against Waterloo, because there was a few prospects, and then I drove kind of overnight to Grand Rapids, Michigan, to watch the U.S. Midget Championships. And there was a guy in the first game and a guy in the last game, of course, at 11 and 7:30, and then drove home from Grand Rapids and then flew to Europe the next day. So that was the start of that trip. So it was basically the month of March. And then on the 30th, I drove up to Cochrane, Ontario, because one of our guys liked the guy on the Thunder Bay Northern Ontario Junior League team. And then drove to Rouyn-Noranda. And if you skip ahead a bit, you'll see what the next months get a little lighter. We have some meetings in Fort Myers on the 6th and 7th there, and then I flew from there to Vancouver to watch a WHL final, and went to a game in Chicago on the 17th. Then we had the combine starting the 27th, and then if you go to the next one, we had some meetings again. That was kind of our final meetings up until the 5th or 6th of June, and then we went in for the draft in Vancouver, and then I left the draft, and about 2 days later went to Washington for rookie camp, and then if you skip ahead again, now we're into the next season. I didn't do a lot. I was pretty tired. And then I went back to Europe, went to Switzerland, and we actually had to hire a few scouts in that window. We hired a guy in Finland, and so we were interviewing him. So yeah, so that's it. There's a couple of 2-week breaks here and there. July and actually September is usually pretty light because there's a lot of stuff doesn't start up till about the 15th. And then late August, obviously. So yeah, that's the race. So, and then it's like at different times of year, you have different priorities. Like early in the year, all of our scouts are getting out into their areas and they're trying to identify the guys that we want to watch. And then through the middle of the part of the year, we're kind of cutting that list. It starts out probably close to 2,000 candidates and it gets cut down to probably 300 or 400. And then we meet, like I said, in December and cut it down to about 150. And the second half of my year, like probably from Christmas on, is really focused probably mostly on the top 75 and try to really lock in and see those first and second and maybe third rounders as much as possible. And then we really rely on the area guys late in the draft. Occasionally it's a guy that I've seen a lot because he plays nearby and I've seen him a lot. But the one thing you notice the second half, I didn't see much in Ontario because there was places I needed to be and that sort of thing. So, that's a typical year. It seems like a lot when you talk about it now, after my last game was March 11th, almost a year ago. So we're approaching 350 plus days, so yeah, if this is what retirement feels like, I'm not ready to retire. So
I was going to say, I've talked to a number of people. They've always said to me, especially in hockey-related jobs, they said when it stops being fun to go to the rink, then I know it's time to stop. But it's never a bad time when you're getting to kind of see A, so many places in the world, but B, so many different talents, sort of thing. Does the process may be similar each year, but is every year obviously a little bit different depending on, how much does it play into, you have that kind of advanced knowledge of, here's where we think the team itself is going to finish and how it's going to affect our position and everything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like we've been lucky. We've had a very good team for a long time. So we've picked late in the first round. So it's allowed us to not focus too much on guys that like we didn't have to really see Alexis Lafreniere play. I'd seen him a lot because he'd been in the league, in the Quebec League for 3 years. So I'd seen him by accident and he played in 2 World Juniors, which we didn't cover there, but I go to every year as well. So I didn't need to see him. Like if we somehow ended up with the first pick and I don't think there was a mathematical possibility. We were just going to take him, and guys like Raymond and guys like that, you watch them maybe a little bit more occasionally as underages because when they're underages, the best ones play up. They always play, they play in the OHL or they play up in Sweden or wherever we happen to be. So, you're always you have to be mindful of your team. And, we're doing okay this year. We're in a playoff spot right now, but we could miss. And so you have to be prepared for that. And usually by this point in early March, you'd have a fairly good, whether you're probably in or probably out. And so you're maybe going to lock in on those guys, but you're also seeing lots of other hockey too. And you have to have to consider your second round pick and you can always make a trade or you can trade out and things like that. So you have to have a pretty good knowledge of everybody, but there's always a few guys you can kind of skip over in the first round that you just know they're going to be gone. But you've seen them anyway. Like you rarely would have a guy unless he was hurt all the time that you hadn't seen.
Obviously, the game has seen its ebbs and flows, and since you started with the Caps sort of thing, that there's been a couple different versions of the NHL kind of thing. Yeah. How much does does your job evaluating players change from year to year, or like maybe is it different 5-10 years ago than it is today, or is it still best available skilled player for that's available at the time kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean that's still kind of the way. Like it's we value hockey sense the most because guys, the good thinkers, even if they don't have a ton of skill, they can still play as your 5th or 6th defenseman and maybe on your 4th line. But those guys, when they're in junior, they often do put up big points because they're smarter than everybody else. But maybe they get to the NHL and the talent's just they can't execute the same way. But it's definitely changed. Like after the full year lockout, they'd had 2 or 3 sort of kind of false starts with kind of cleaning up the hooking and holding, but they finally got it out and that was 2005. And at that time, the draft went from 9 rounds to 7 rounds too. So it probably, like a few teams like Buffalo went from being a team that was fighting for a playoff spot then to winning the President's Trophy, because they had a small, speedy team, but the rules were always kind of, or the way they called the rules, I should say, were always conspiring against them. So once they started called them by the book, all of a sudden, wow, they were the kind of card carrying member. But scouts kind of figure out what they like, and it probably took 5 or 6 years for the community to adapt to that. So I would say the drafting started changing around 2010, and people weren't afraid to take a 5'10" guy in the first round. Like Mitch Marner is a great example. He went 4th overall, and had he come along 20 years prior, he probably would have been drafted in the 2nd or 3rd round, just because he would have just been. It was so easy to eliminate guys like that. And I mean, hockey players, they train differently now. They used to train for bulk, and now they train for a lot more fast twitch and more wiry strength. And there's a lot of great skills coaches out there in skills camps. So the average skill has gone up. One of the things I really like that coaches are doing, and we do it at the NHL level, is they play lots of small area games with their players. It's a great way for them to learn little plays and techniques, and there's all kinds of them. Like I like to watch practice, and I always see them in practice. And like I mentioned at the beginning, I help out the Oak Ridge High School team when I can, and our practices are mostly small area games, and a little bit of stuff that I need them to work on, but they love it, and they get better because it teaches them how to think in the game concepts rather than sort of doing a drill and shoot it here and pass it here. And you can kind of tell the kids that grew up in a creative, spontaneous environment. We used to find, and here's another example, but we used to find that a lot of the American players didn't think the game very well, because they often were the best player by far in their area and never had any competition. So they would just take the puck and go end to end. And then they would get to the OHL or get to college hockey, where there was a lot of structure, especially if a guy was from a non-traditional hockey area. Let's say he was from Florida or California. It is a hockey area now. And so they struggled once they got to that point. But I mean, now the game's grown a lot in the States, and they're probably one of the first ones to start with the small area games. So now the Americans think it really well. But we used to always wonder if they were going to be able to sort it out at the NHL level and the higher levels. And, they had the individual skills, but maybe not those sort of team concepts and sort of, ability to work together to break down the other team.
How do you balance that? And obviously it's just become an international game, and it's, there's not as much maybe disparity between, the North American or the Canadian, the U.S. players. I don't want to go too John Cherry here, but we all love them. But as opposed to, a kid from Sweden or something along that lines. And we've all heard over the years, the kid making his move over, even when he comes to the OHL for the import draft, that transition from European hockey, the big ice and so on and so forth.
Right.
Is it still the same, or is it starting to be kind of a little more?
No, there's differences. And I think, in my evolution as a scout, I mean, you're always evaluating their attributes. You're always evaluating, it starts with how they skate and how much skill they have and how they think and how hard they work. And obviously size still is a factor, because, if you're equal, but one player is a little stronger, he's still going to have an advantage. It's not the advantage it once was, where 6'4" and 210 pounds was a big advantage, because now it's based more on thinking and skating. I think one of the, in my evolution, and being traveling heavily in Europe for a long time, and if on the schedule there, I see a lot of league games in Europe where the European leagues take 3 or 4 breaks during the year when they play tournaments, under 18 tournaments typically, and under 20, which is those are a lot of draft eligible players. So we get a lot of bang for our buck, and teams will send 3 or 4 scouts at least, if not more, from North America to those events, because you can see a lot and not have to, it costs money to go to Europe, but it doesn't cost crazy money. Mm-hmm. So once I kind of understood how each of those leagues work and what their sort of standards and protocols are, and maybe understanding the cultures a little bit, it really helped me to sort of kind of look at the player and use my imagination and kind of imagine what he would look like in the OHL or in a league over here that I really understand the base levels. Like, they're always a great league. Any night I can go watch a game in the OHL and I'm going to see, at least 2 or 3 and sometimes 10 players that are already drafted. So I know the guy I'm watching for this year's draft is playing against first rounders and second rounders and seventh rounders. So it's easy to kind of easy. It's never easy. It's the wrong word. It's less difficult. Let's go with that. This isn't being recorded, is it? I hope my bosses never see it. So
I promise I won't keep it for. We'll post it later, unless there's unless you need buddy to shoot some videos for the team, then I might have it on camp.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's easier to calibrate those picks when it's your kind of home area that you grew up with. But it's, when I go to the Quebec League and I go to a lot of other leagues and the Western Hockey League, I get that too, because I've seen those players. I'll give you a good example about Sweden that pops into my head. Victor Hedman, the player that plays for Tampa. I was at a camp. It was a trial camp for the Swedish under-20 team. They were scrimmaging. It was his draft year, and the Swedes usually have a lot of players. So again, we had a good team. We weren't going to get him, but you love to watch the good players play. And I said to our scout, Mats Widerstall, I said, like, Matt, sometimes I watch him. He carries the puck the whole game, and other games he doesn't carry it a foot. And he said, "What's with this guy?" And I was being critical and goes, "Well, Matt said, well, it depends if he plays left defense or right defense." And at the time, a lot of the Swedish teams were playing this torpedo, a 2-2-1, where the right side attacked and the left side defended. So when Hedman was the left defenseman, he was actually the one. He was the guy back. He was the defenseman. And when he was the right defenseman, he was kind of the right attacking midfielder from a sort of a soccer terminology. So things like that helped me understand. Like when I would go watch Swedish games, it helped me understand what the roles are. And, I try to talk to coaches, and sometimes they're eager to tell you their systems. And so you can understand if a kid is making, I shouldn't call them kids, but if he's making the right decisions in the context of the way he's been coached, rather than the way I want to see him play or, our ideals. I was watching a game in Moose Jaw, and I was watching the defenseman, and I thought he's soft, like he's never first guy in the corner. And so I talked to the coach after the game, and he goes, "Well, he's not dumb." I said, the coach told me I coached them to let the guy go in and then go in and hit him, because why do you want to go in, get hit or knocked down? Now you're totally out of the play in your own zone. So it was a kind of a defensive thought process to always stay on the defensive side of the puck and to not get eliminated. Obviously you go get the puck sometimes when you have a chance to get out of the zone. So understanding things like that, and there's all kinds of them around the world. It just sort of helps to kind of maybe understand how that player is hoping to play and what his attributes are and how they might translate. So
trying to make it so it's not a knock on the kid and his skill and ability, but obviously what being told, and obviously that plays into his knowledge as well. How much does he actually listen to his coach? So absolutely,
yeah.
On the same, not everybody and their cousin gets to go into the war room on during draft day. I've had the opportunity, I think, once to be in a junior hockey war room during the draft, and it was Robinson, go sit in the corner, don't say anything. You're allowed to be in the room. That's pretty much it. And no worry that kind of had nothing that happens in here goes outside the door. And okay, fine. But
I'm sure it was a great education, though. It was probably really insightful.
It was a day. Now, for those, I know you won't give away trade secrets or anything, but when it comes to the day of, I know that the one time I was allowed in, there was some interesting conversation. There wasn't no chairs were thrown or anything like that. But how spirited does it get? Because obviously, as you say, that's one of the not few times, but one of the kind of handful of times that you get everybody in the room, and I'm sure it's up top in the first couple of rounds. It's pretty solidified, and then maybe some additional input comes in.
Yeah, well, I mean, our draft is usually a live draft. Last year was the first one I participated in where it wasn't, and I went to Washington for the draft, but there was only two of us that are heavily involved in the amateur side that were there. The other guys were home, so we had them on a call like this, and so I interacted with them. But our draft, because of it's actually a lot. It would be more spirited at the meetings, but even then, it's not. Like our guys have been together for a long time, and they talk all the time, and they kind of work together and sort of kind of respect each other and kind of come to a consensus. And the way we do it, our guys see probably less of more. Like they only know one or two areas, and they really focus on that. And then we have a few guys that make a few extra trips to Europe, and myself and Ross Mahoney, our assistant GM, make a lot of trips to see the top players. So we kind of count on the area guys to get the areas right. And then Ross and myself and them, because they will have enough, they'll see them at Canada's under 18 camp and things like that. We all kind of just blend it together, but not, we're kind of, our group was a bit of an older group. Like most of us were in our 50s for a while. I mean, I shaved off my gray beard yesterday. I was telling Clark before we got on, I thought it was getting pretty long. So we've got a couple of younger guys, and they're good. Like we just hired them in the last couple of years, and they're good. They are passionate, and they haven't made a lot of mistakes yet. I think when you make a lot of mistakes, because we get players wrong, somebody once described it as trying to go to grade 5 and guess who the doctors and lawyers are going to be. Because at 17, the difference between 17 and 25 is huge. So, we're respectful, but we also listen, and we know how to listen to our guys. And the draft tends to be a little more hushed. Like, we'll know, like you said, the first few rounds, we have a list that we generally follow. And then after that, the area guy will always have seen this player way more than I have or Ross will have. So, we'll call them over and kind of whisper with them. And if there's a concern or we're wondering why a player's sliding, we'll maybe get the area scout to call his coach to see if there's something that we didn't know, an injury or something that's come up. But it's often just preference. It's just teams just chose to pick another guy ahead of him. Players don't slide. They're often sometimes the next guy on everybody's list, but somebody else happened to be there. So, the biggest interactions we have would be between myself and Ross and our GM, Brian McClellan. Just when we try to trade up or trade back a lot, you're always trying to maximize your draft capital. And so if you can, maybe trade back and you get the same player, but you get an extra third round pick, you're increasing your chances. Or you feel there's a break and this is the very last really good player left. So we have to give up a third or fourth round pick to get up an extra 2 spots or 10 spots or whatever. So a lot of the interaction of the draft is like that. And like the interaction with the scouts, they have our list and the list gets broken down. Like there's a main list, but there's also areas and positions. There's lots of sub lists. So they can all look and sort of guess who the next guy is going to be. But we just talk, but it's more hushed because we're on display, we're on the floor. So yeah, and I miss that. I mean, it's great.
The opposition teams are literally, left and righty. It's not like you'd be like, hey, John, what do you think of so-and-so?
Oh yeah. And sometimes you can hear their conversation and, the draft we had during the lockout, we had in a small ballroom in Ottawa. And I mean, I'm sure if I snapped my head back, I would have hit the guy behind me. Like we were that tight. Like it was very non-COVID, like very shoulder to shoulder. We were all flying coach that day. So we were in the back all boxed in. So no, it's, and I mean, guys know a lot of scouts from the other teams, especially from the areas they're from. And there's a certain amount of camaraderie. And you can go up to any scout the night of the draft and say, you don't have a clue who they picked because you're focused on who you got. And you go, wow, I thought you guys had a great draft. Because every team thinks they had a great draft. Because you only pick guys you like. You don't pick guys you don't like, right? You go in a hockey pool. I haven't been in a hockey pool in years, but you think you won every time. You go, well, I can't believe those idiots didn't pick those guys. We're the same. It's the same. It's just a different scale. So, yeah.
Who is it different first round, second round, third round as you go, and who makes who pulls the trigger on who's the call, or is it as you said, it's very list based and it'd be kind of a scenario, this is the guy we think that's in our spot and go from there?
Yeah, it's list based for the most part in the early part of the draft. I mean, I guess I'm the head scout, so I'm kind of putting forward who I think we should pick, and Ross and I tend to agree because we've had a lot of discussions and we tend to follow our list. I mean, he could overrule it, I guess, Ross Mahoney, but Brian McClellan could overrule him, but he doesn't. He will watch some video and he'll see a few of the top guys, and he asks a lot of questions and he just wants to know what types of players. And at times we've prioritized different things like goalies and whatever, but not really. You generally just take the best available player. And if you end up with 5 right wings, the odds are they're all not going to play. And if they all do play, well, then you've got a great problem because you'll have somebody to trade. Like in one draft, we drafted Semyon Varlamov, who was an NHL starter, still is, and drafted Michael Neuwirth, who is probably, he's not a starter anymore. And we had another second round pick that year, and we wanted to take Steve Mason. But our GM at the time said, we can't take 3 goalies. And I said, well, if they all work out, we'll have a great trade chip. And we should have done it. And we took somebody that didn't play. I don't think I'm sharing anything untowards but you generally just pick who you want to pick. And like I said, towards the end of the draft, it really falls probably from the 4th round on or 5th round on, it falls to the area guys. And the percentage from the 5th round on is maybe 6%. Like the odds are this guy's not going to play. So, but we encourage our guys to really, we want to take guys with high ceilings, guys that can really think and have a really good attribute and have something that maybe even develop the rest of their game. But there's lots of stories with those guys. It's amazing, those late round picks and the free agents that play. When you look back at who they were at 17 and 18 to where they get to, there's so many development events that happen in their time. If they grow or they get a new skating coach, or there's all kinds of things. They get a coach that plays them with a good player and they realize, oh, this guy's pretty good too. It's like my dad, who was a scout, used to always tell me, when you're watching defenseman, watch his partner too, because sometimes the partner's really good and he's covering up for the lousy guy. So you're always watching for things like that. So sometimes maybe you take the partner in the late rounds and he works out, so.
You go to the rink looking for one guy, and all of a sudden you realize maybe it's this guy that maybe my focus needs to go over here.
Yeah, that used to happen more in the old days, but absolutely that used to happen. in the old days, now the information travels instantly, and there's, Central Scouting produces lists for us that we kind of use to sort of double check. We don't really go off them per se, but we just make sure we haven't missed names. And then there's other places like Redline Report and hockeyprospect.com. There's dozens of them. So there aren't many secret players. There's the odd one. Like, we drafted an Australian a few years ago off of our minor league team. It was a crazy circumstance. A player named Nathan Walker, who played a few games for us and then went to St. Louis, and I think he's still in their organization. But he was born in Wales, grew up in Australia, and somebody saw him at like a D pool in a Czech coach, like playing against South Africa and a bunch of places that you wouldn't even think they'd have ice. And so Nathan at 15 or 16 went to the Czech Republic and played 3 years over there. And we put Nathan on our list, and we just didn't get to him, but we liked him. He played really hard, and he, just had some hockey sense. And so so we invited him to our rookie camp that year, but because of the rules, we weren't allowed to sign him. If you can't sign free agents at age 17 from Europe. So he went back to Europe, and he played half the year in the Czech Republic, then came over and played in Youngstown in the USHL and got a point a game. Not drafted again on our list. So we had him, but we just didn't quite get to him. So we invited him to camp, and we thought we could sign him because he played in Youngstown, but because he played too many days in Czech, he was still counted as a European free agent. So we signed him to an American League free agent contract because he played pro hockey. So he played on our American League team, but he was still draft eligible. So there's been hardly ever anybody drafted from the American League. And so in the 4th round or 3rd round, I forget where, we picked Nathan off of our own farm team. And we could have taken a chance and not drafted him and then tried to sign him as a free agent, but we liked him enough. And he played one game in our Stanley Cup run, and he's played a handful of games, and he's a great story, and he's a great kid. Like, he sounds like Crocodile Dundee. It's great to hear the way he talks at the rink. And, he played a great game against Pittsburgh in the conference semifinal, and in the one playoff game he got in. So, he was an organizational asset. We were disappointed to lose him.
You mentioned obviously going over to Europe. You're going to a certain game during whether it be a league-based game or one of those the playoff games and that kind of thing. You're maybe looking at one or two. How much is the top prospects game? The CHL top prospects game, is that like a Scouts candy store where it's just like it's just everything's right there for you? You're not just looking at maybe one or two kids in the group.
It's hard. It's really hard because typically there's 40 guys in the game, and some years they all get drafted. Most years it's probably 34 to 36, 35, whatever. So 90%. So it's a tough game. With that game, I generally record it too, and then I'll watch it in person, and then maybe watch it at least 2 or 3 more times because it is unique as a best on best event. Clark loves it because I used to do a talk with his class, and I always called it the most dangerous game in hockey because people would come, like GMs and pro scouts, that didn't see these guys all year, and some guy would get 2 goals or win the hardest shot contest, and he's a player, and those guys for a long time would get drafted in the 1st round. But after a while, like now, teams know that you're going to make a mistake doing that, and so some GMs come, a lot don't.
They leave that to the smart guys such as yourself that have seen the guy about 400 or 500 different.
Yeah. That's a hard game for me. Like it's really a hard game. I don't really know how to approach it. I've never quite figured it out, but it's good. It's a good viewing on guys. And our group usually goes and watches the testing. They do all this skating testing in the morning, and that's always pretty good too, because we don't necessarily go off the times, but you start to see guys separate out a bit as skaters. And sometimes a guy's got a bit of a funky stride, but then he posts these really good times. And so maybe you just watch him a little more closely and realize he's got more speed and quickness than you thought. And it's also interesting to see how they interact with each other and interact with the people running the rink and the coaches and things like that. We want to draft good citizens too, as much as possible, but it's so yeah, that's a tough game. So
obviously you go through all the work. We saw the schedule of traveling, going to the draft. You get the guys you like and that sort of thing. Obviously I've been told in the past, especially from a scout perspective, they become obviously your guys, your kids, especially if it's an area situation. And then all of a sudden, you even mentioned it here once or twice already. Things happen. It's a business. He gets moved, or you get a guy, and then all of a sudden, I know there's obviously the expansion drafts are playing into it big as well.
Yeah.
how much is it to that the difficult cut side of it when you've scouted a guy, you've seen him, you loved him, and then maybe either he doesn't work in the situation or he gets traded, that kind of thing? Is that a difficult aspect of the job, kind of thing?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it depends. Like, once they're drafted, they kind of move out of our, once they move into the pro hockey, they move out of the amateur side. We have multiple development coaches that their interaction with those guys, like, I think for them, probably it would be a little harder. For me, my kids are now, young adults, but when they were little, it was great because they were around the team a lot, and, they had their favorites. And so it would be interesting to ask them that question. Like Braden Holtby was wonderful with my son. My son is a goalie too. And, I had him at a practice in Detroit one day, and Charlie, my son, brought his goalie glove in. He wanted to show Holtby. He was probably 7. And I was in there. I was kind of off to the side. I was talking to the coaches because I know our coaches usually pretty well, although I've never met this your set of coaches in person because we have new coaches. So at least that I can recall. I might have met Peter before, but usually we talk to them because at camps and things, they always want to ask about the kids. And so because they want to know what they think, if what they think they're seeing is what we have seen. And so anyway, so Charlie was in the middle of the room, probably looking at all the sticks and the equipment or something. He's fascinated by that as a 7-year-old. And Braden came in the room and he was going to his stall, but he immediately saw this little kid with a goalie glove and he went right over to him. Like, I wasn't there. I mean, I knew Braden to say hello and whatever, but he had this great conversation with Charlie for about 5 minutes, and so those things like that, I'm sure, were harder on Charlie, but he still has that treasured memory, and I was thrilled for Braden when he won the cup with our team, and the reality is, guys move on, but he's a great guy and a great citizen, and a lot of them are. So yeah, you want to draft them all, and you all want them to win the cup with your team, but the reality is, the salary cap world, you can't keep them all. So you just have to keep drafting them.
Yeah, obviously that early 2000s, 2004, if I recall, 3-4 area, that Ovechkin guy has worked out pretty well.
Yeah, he's not bad. He's not bad.
That was, obviously I know, part of the group in that cut. Was that the easiest scouting aspect for everybody? Yeah, that we already know this one. Let's worry about.
Well, Malkin was picked too, and he's had a great career. We did have some discussions about it. The funny thing about that is we were third, like before the lottery that week, the last week of the regular season, we were third. And so it looked like we were going to have to make a decision about Andrew Ladd or Cam Barker, or there was a few others in that window. And actually, no, we were second, pardon me. And we won a game and dropped to third. And so all of a sudden we put ourselves in a bad spot. And then we ended up winning the lottery from the third spot. So you don't know. I mean, that's just dumb luck. So, yeah, we picked him. And I think, we talked about Malkin a lot. And obviously there was some trade offers because Alex looked like a generational player. But we committed to that. And, he's better than we thought he'd be. Nobody thinks they're drafting that. Maybe with Connor McDavid, he's probably the best prospect I've seen, and he was a can't miss kid from 15 on. But Ovi was pretty good too. Like I think he was 16, he got 14 goals in 7 games at the World Under 18 Championship. So they would probably be the best 2 I've seen at age 15 and 16.
I'll put you on the spot. Can he break the goal scoring record? Is he? Can he? Is one.
Yeah, that's a hard one. I hope he does. I'm not going to root against him. I think the thing that you have to remember with Alex is he missed 82 games his first year because we were locked out all year. Then he missed 34 games another year when there was we were locked out. Then he missed, I don't know, probably 10 or 11 last year, and then he missed what would it be this year, 26. So we're getting close to 150 games. Mm-hmm. So given his regular rate of scoring, that's probably a minimum of 75, but it may be even as many as 90 goals. So if he's at that number and almost at 800, I think we're talking a different type of thing. But I think he's at 7 something in the low 7s. I think Phil Esposito has 717. He's next. I think Alex, he scored today, so I think he's around 710-ish. So we still got 180 goals to go. That's a lot of goals. So I hope he does, and I hope. Whatever happens, I hope it's close. But I think you throw those games in there. In my opinion, he's already the greatest. Like I asked my uncle Scott there. Clark mentioned him, and I asked him who the greatest goal scorers ever were, and he said Ovechkin, Bossy, and Richard. Like relative to their level, they were the 3 best that were that sort of had a a leg up. You know, I mean, I don't know how many times he's won the top goal scorer or been right there, but it's a crazy record. It's like Gretzky winning the scoring championship. It's hard to score goals. It's, you know, so.
And he just kind of kept the Richard Trophy around for a while. It was just the one that hung out on the shelf for a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a joy to watch him play, and it's been a joy to watch him grow up and you know, win the cup and have a great time celebrating and you know, have a family.
The championship celebration. That's kind of why I went Ovechkin, and then I wanted to talk about the Stanley Cup, the run sort of thing, because obviously there was the build, and then, you know, the narrative was, you know, they finally got there kind of thing. How enjoyable was that as an organization to kind of finally see that kind of happen for that group?
I'm actually getting chills talking about it. You know, my basement's really hot. I should take this vest off, but I figure I got to wear the logo. So it's like, you know, of the 10 best days of my life, other than, you know, when the kids were born and when we got married, probably 7 of them happened in that window. Like, honestly, it was just, you know, when we finally got the final, we finally got by Pittsburgh. That was a great day. And then we beat Tampa in 7 and, you know, finally got to the final. And then when we won the final, and, you know, we were then in Vegas when we won with our wives, the scouts were, and we were on the ice afterwards, and I, you know, got to lift the cup on the ice, which was really special. And you're getting me now. So, you know, and then, you know, I had a day with the cup here in the backyard, and you know, we got our rings, and like, so many of those things were just, it was a dream come true. It really was a dream come true. Like because I kind of resigned myself. You know, I sort of thought our team was getting older, and, you know, we started to hear whispers, oh, they should break it up and they should do this. And I thought, you know, I've had a pretty good career. I've worked for over 20 years for one team at that time. And, you know, I've got a pretty interesting job and position with the team, and we've won our division lots and lots of times. And I just sort of thought, yeah, I've had a good career. I'm satisfied with that. And I was wrong. I was fooling myself. It was just something I was telling myself, quite honestly. And then when it all happened, it was just surreal. And it was really interesting to share with, like, Jim McKellar, who's with Chicago, who is, you know, was part of 2 of their cup wins, and a few other guys. There's a club you're in now, you know, where you can, and even talking with my uncle, like Clark mentioned it in the opening, where, you know, we have 18 as a family. And there was an article in the Free Press at some point where he called me, and it's true. He called me during our run. I think we were probably playing Tampa, and he said, you know, if you win, we can say we have 18 wins as a family. And I said, well, I'm still related, and I can say we have 17. He said, no, it doesn't count till you get one of your own. So he was happier than anybody. Like, he was over the moon, you know, like, I was so thrilled for him too. And unfortunately he had a family reunion on the other side of his family, and he couldn't be here on the cup day. He was heartbroken, and it fell on the 13th, and he's very superstitious about 13th. So it was the 13th of July, so he couldn't make it. So he was cursed. So I hope we win another one so I can celebrate one with him. So.
You mentioned, obviously, you know, Dad was involved with the game. You know, there's lots of connections, sort of thing. Have holiday dinners ever been a little bit tense? And especially everybody's at different organizations. There's never a talk.
Absolutely not. If we can't win, I hope they win. It was awkward my first year. Like, my dad died shortly after my first year. He was with Buffalo for years, and we beat them in the semifinal. That was probably the worst successful thing I'd been part of. And he'd given years to the Sabres at that point, and I was a brand new scout. Like, my contributions to the Caps scout run were, you know, 0.00001%. I hadn't even been to a draft yet, but. You know, I remember we got to the final, and I talked to a scout there, a guy named Murray Oliver, who was a great old scout. He's passed away a few years ago. And I was feeling kind of sheepish because, you know, I kind of didn't feel like I'd earned it. And he said, no, you're a hockey lifer. Like, he said, he'd been in the game at that time 38 years, and he'd been to the final twice and never won. So he said, you better enjoy this. And so, you know, I remembered that. And as I've kind of witnessed other teams where maybe some guys got in and got a chance before they'd really had a chance to, you know, help their team get better. You got to remind them, like, if you're in for the long run, it doesn't matter. Sometimes the cup wins you. And, you know, so no, our dinners were other. That was probably the only time I could ever remember in my life that my dad and I were a little tense with each other. But you know, and I think he probably knew he was having some health problems. But no, when, you know, we lost to my uncle's team in the final, and they were, you know, a joy to watch. That was so many great players. I think there was probably 9 Hall of Famers on that team. So, you know, no, it was never like that. No, it was a lot of hockey conversation at dinner, a lot of moving salt and pepper shakers around. I mean, when I was young, I just used to listen to the 2 of them talk and then try to be a sponge. You know, Stan Stan, my cousin, he's I think 7 years younger than me, so he was even younger off to the side. I was at one time. There's a story too. At one time, I was a decent amateur golfer, and I got to play in the Ontario Amateur one year, and so Stan caddied for me. So I was probably 20 or 22, and Stan was maybe 15, and because I'd won the section here, I was paired with Mike Weir, who lost by a shot today on the senior tour, and Gary Cowan, who won 2 U.S. amateurs. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, there's 3 people in this group that are destined for greatness. I didn't realize one of them was my caddy, and the other 2 were already the golfers. I was an ultra ran as a golfer. I thought I'd made it. And I think I shot about 84 and missed the cut. Like, it was just too much for me to handle. So yeah. So no, I mean, I was really happy for Stan too, especially. And the same thing, like his first year as the GM there, he'd been with the Hawks for a few years. They won the cup, but you can't begrudge anybody that. It's, you're always so happy for people when they win. You really are. I try to be. I don't know if everybody feels that way, but I really hope everybody, like, there's so many lifers that never get a chance, and I really hope everybody can win one. Just let us win a couple more and then take your turn. So
I'll put the call to everybody for watching along to submit those questions, throw them up on the chat, and we'll try and get to those in a couple seconds here. As I still got a couple left, so I usually throw out the call just so they cue them in a little bit here. But yeah. I've been told I have to ask about Scotty's basement in Buffalo.
It's better than Hall of Fame. This, what you see behind me or over that way, I guess, is completely staged. Like when you win the cup, they give you a little mini cup with your name on it, which is really cool. That's mine back there, and then I think that's probably an Ovi jersey and a photo. My aunt and uncle's basement is like wall to wall sticks, memorabilia. They have his vintage Hockey Night in Canada blue blazer. My aunt kept it in a cedar closet down there. It's mint. And like track suits from the Canadians. He was a scout for a long time, and there's notebooks on his scouting, and it's got like a hotel 50 cents and dinner, $8 or whatever. I mean, those prices aren't right, but it's fascinating. And it's just fascinating, the photos of him with Bobby Orr and prime ministers and just photos. It's really an incredible place. It's better than the Hall of Fame. And a funny story about that is Clark and I played a lot of softball together, and we were probably in our mid-20s. And a friend of ours, Tim Hart, and myself were staying at my aunt and uncle's because we were playing a provincial tournament or something in Niagara Falls with Clark's team from Stratford. And Clark was staying in Niagara Falls. So we'd played our last game, and Tim and I were going back to the house. It's about maybe 40 minutes from the border, maybe not even. And so we said, well, we want to come to the house. So that we probably got there around 9 o'clock. Clark hadn't been there. Like, he drove. He knew my uncle a bit. He'd met him a few times because he's always around a lot. Like, they've kept a home in Buffalo, and obviously this isn't far away. And then when he coached in Detroit, they would just drive back and forth. So we often see them when they go back and forth. Him and his wife Suella, my aunt. So we got Clark in the basement, and about 12:30 or 1 a.m. we had to go to bed. We had to play the next morning at 7. We said, Clark, you got to go home. Like, you got to get out of here. He couldn't leave this place because he was an aspiring coach at the time, and he's had an unbelievable career. I mean, it's like really unbelievable. I was reading something. He's now 3rd all time in CIS wins, or U Sports. I'm sorry, but yeah, that basement, he could tell you more about it than me. But I've been lucky enough to take a lot of friends there over the years. They've kind of packed it up a lot now because they're retiring. But yeah, there's obviously, like, that trophy. There's I think he's got 14. So he's got 14 of those. And then he's been coach of the year, I think, only twice. And then you also get a trophy if you win your conference. So I have those mine are upstairs for those, and then the rings, I think he had the rings. They usually stay at the bank, as does mine. But he won a couple of championships before then with Peterborough. They won the Memorial Cup, so he's got all the rings. Like, it's just it's the best hockey museum you could ever go to. Like, sticks and just really cool stuff. It's just it's a special place. It's great when you go there with somebody for the first time because it's overwhelming. You just don't know where to start. So. Yeah,
I can imagine what the aspect is like as a Red Wings fan. I'd be just sitting there.
You would love it. Yeah. Well, he's had a great career. Like, he started with the Blues, obviously, and then obviously, like Clark said, Pittsburgh and Detroit and Montreal, obviously, in Chicago. So yeah, he coached a few places. He said it just well traveled, and yeah, it's awesome. It's a great hockey life. So
got a couple questions coming in, so we'll put them up here. Obviously, as everybody, thanks so much for checking in with us tonight. How do you define hockey sense and how important is it when you scout? Any thoughts on how coaches can develop it in their athletes?
There's no name on this question?
Somebody's created under Western Mustangs performance.
All right.
I'm not sure. I can't compare.
Okay. Yeah, it's how would I define it? I think it's kind of the magic of the game. It's how you think the game, like Wayne Gretzky always talked about, you have to know where the puck is going, rather than going to where the puck is. So I think it's just sort of that ability and feel to know what the situation, what the right play is, and that's why scouts sit up high. It's easier to see the patterns in the game from up high. Generally, like we struggle when we're in a small high school rink or any sort of small rink where it's a little bit intimate. We prefer, medium to bigger. Like London's a really good size to scout in. Like I would rather sit in the last row than the first row in London, type of thing. So I think it's just kind of, you just watch their decision making. And I think the best way to develop is small area games. Google that. Like there's Hockey Canada has stuff. There's a great one that I don't know if I can describe it. I wish I could, but I've seen the Penguins do it. And like I said, I do it with the high school team where you take both nets and you put them on the goal line. Below, I wish I had salt and pepper shakers right below the dots. Okay. And then you play basically 2-on-2 and the team attacks directly at that net. So I don't know if I explained this very well. So it ends up being a 3-on-2 game. So when you get the puck, you can have a third guy. And as soon as you lose a puck, you have a second guy. So what you're doing, it's a bit of a hockey sense thing, because one thing you always want to do is use the width in the attacking zone. So when the kids would get the puck, then they would just turn and fire it to the far point, because all of a sudden you've moved the whole game across, and the defensive players have to start running around, and now you've created an odd number situation. So there's lots of really good games like that. I don't know how to. I mean, if you know that person, tell them to send you a note, and I'll try to draw it out for them. But there's all kinds of those, and the players love them. And you'll notice if you have a few that you regularly play in practice, and you can even do it in playing ball hockey and things like that, you'll start to see those things in the game, like little passing. Like the one thing I would say about drills and coaches, and again, this is a Scotty thing, but he always said there's not enough passing in every practice, including at the NHL level. Everybody wants to skate, and that's great, but you got to pass. And that's the one thing that strikes you when you watch really elite players play, is they can handle really bad passes. Well, that's because they've practiced it. Like you want to gun those passes as best as you can, but they take the ones off their feet or off the boards or the odd ones. And so if you have a lot of passing in practice, it'll start to show up in your games, and so, like I said, do small area, like make sure you build in, like you can do half the practice small area games. You can do it all, quite honestly. Mm-hmm. I always thought it'd be a great experiment just to only do that, to see how much you could teach. I don't know what Clark's feelings are on that, but I know how he thinks about the game, and I'm sure he would agree. So, but yeah, that's their magic. I highly encourage you to do those.
Rick Odegaard from our Mustangs athletic alumni. We all know Rick. Obviously a great supporter of everything youth sports and everything Mustangs. You mentioned going up to Cochrane or an area to check out a certain kid that someone had said you got to go check this guy out. First, I'll ask you two-part on this one. How many times do you get that where somebody says, hey Steve, you got to go see this guy?
Yeah, that happens a lot. You'd be surprised. But I usually ask our area guys, because they often already know the player. I mean, especially now with, our kids, our youngest is 17, our oldest is 21. I know a lot of people who have kids playing in the OHL, and so they often have a friend. Like Jacob Bryson played his first game for Buffalo the other night. He's an area kid, and somebody had mentioned his name to me, and he was playing prep school hockey in New England. So I asked our New England guy to check him out, and he ended up not getting drafted that year. He got drafted the next year, so I guess we should have drafted him. But the Cochrane one, the guy was actually playing for Thunder Bay, and was a younger player. His name escapes me. He's still playing college hockey. I want to say he's at Bowling Green, but I could be wrong. Central Scouting had listed him and on one of their lists, and so Thunder Bay is close to Minnesota. Obviously, it borders the Minnesota. So our Minnesota scout, we asked him to go up there and see him, and he liked them. And then our technically that's the Ontario Scouts area, so he flew to Thunder Bay, and he didn't mind him. Like he was a late round guy, and I mean, part of that, it's a little misleading because I drove to Rouyn-Noranda for 2 games in the Quebec League final after that. If Thunder Bay lost, but had they got to the Royal Bank Cup that year, then I might have gone. So I was going to Rouyn-Noranda anyway, and it was a small detour to Cochrane, but that's where the highway ends. Actually, there's no highway after Cochrane going north in Ontario. So yeah, it was fine. It was fun. So different experience, So. And how often is it spontaneous? Not that often, but things like that happen. and then discovering someone no one else knows about. There aren't many secrets, quite honestly. I mean, like I mentioned with Nathan Walker a little bit, like he kind of was hiding in plain sight for people, but there probably were some back in the old days, like the old timers love to say, but there aren't many now because there's so many scouting services and the internet's just so fast that information finds us. And that's one thing that's really hard for our scouts. It's one of the hardest things for all of us to learn is to ignore those lists, because those are often not people that actually have seen the player play. One of our new scouts said, because we provide those for our guys just to help them double check things. And one of the guys asked and said, well, which one's the best list? And I just said, well, it's our list. It's your list. Like, we want your list. We don't want somebody else's. So you can use those as good tools for things, but you don't want them to be your list. I mean, sometimes it's going to match up, but more often than not, we'd rather, because we know what you value and what we value. So.
And I got to, before I throw it back over to Clark, got to ask you about the year that is for your group, and obviously the process that it took to get to the divisions in the States, the Canadian division as a whole, sort of thing. How interesting and how kind of crazy has this year been for the big club?
Oh, I mean, I haven't seen them. Like, it's ironic. They've been in Buffalo 4 times, and often if they'd been there 4 times, I probably would have gone to 1 or 2 of those if I happened to be around. So I haven't had a lot of interaction with our guys. Like I said, I've never had a conversation with our head coach. Like, I think I've met him before, but not lately. And that's not my job. I mean, he's not, we don't interact much, although we will maybe at a rookie camp. So I think it's been pretty good. I mean, we had a little COVID outbreak there, and a few players were out for a few games, and we've had a lot of injuries, but they seem to be playing well. And I think our pro scouts have really done a good job with some of the players they've brought in, like, Justin Schultz and guys like that. So, I mean, I've watched our team play more times this year probably than I would in 3 years combined. I've watched every single game. I mean, unless I was getting a snack, I watched every minute probably, type of thing. So, it's interesting. It's been good for me to watch all the other teams. Our daughter always laughs, like on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, always lots of games on. And so we'll watch the end of 7 games. And so she knows what happened. And she's a kind of a hockey fan, but we just flip channels, and I'm always checking my phone. Okay, there's 6 minutes to go in that game. And so for me, it helps because I don't get to watch a lot of NHL because I'm usually at the rinks and there's just not enough hours in the day. And if I have extra hockey to watch, I tend to watch draft eligible players. So it's been good to see certain guys are better than I thought. Certain guys aren't as good as I thought. There's always a development curve. So you have to be mindful of that. So I've really enjoyed watching it. I love the North Division. I think it's unique. I think those games are really, used to be an event every time Montreal played Toronto, and now you get events 2 or 3 times a week. And in this country, I don't know what they're thinking for viability of that, because the time zones would be kind of onerous playing a regular schedule, but it's been good. Our division's been mostly the same. A couple of teams are missing, but it's been good.
And finally, I lied. I said the last one.
Oh, keep going. I can go around.
How early, or how many guys have chirped at you for the fact that your Twitter handle is @HockeyScout?
I think you're the first. So I wasn't early about.
We've been clamoring for. They'd end up, Hockey Scout _084673.
I've heard it a few places. I think it's my Instagram too.
Yeah,
so
I was gonna say you're pretty good on. I jokingly said one time somebody told me that Max Domi had to pay somebody so he can get @Max for his handle. You've got straight up Hockey Scout, no underscores, no extra numbers.
I was early. Like when I was early on it, like I really was, because I at the time it was a great source of information. Like, it was really great for rosters and little transactions and changes. I mean, Twitter now is kind of angry, so I don't spend a lot of time on it, and I prefer. I know where I like to get my news from and whatever. And a lot of the news comes to you. Like, I get stuff emailed to me from the team every day that I need to read. So, we get all the clippings from all the NHL teams and beat writers and whatever. So, when I was looking for information, that was the way to get it. But nowadays too, like it's going to be valuable again, because a lot of the times with line charts and things like that, when I do go to games, they're going to post them on Twitter. There's not going to be any paper copies, just to minimize interaction and things like that. So yeah, no, I was really, really early, and because Scotty's his coach WSP, and I actually set him up on that. If you look, I'm his first follower. So because he is William Scott Bowman. So yeah, he couldn't get I'm Scotty or whatever. So or Scotty wins. Scotty wins would have been good. So,
he's done it a couple times, that's for sure.
Yeah, he's done it a couple times. So yeah, no, I have that a few places. So yeah. So,
All right, I've gone a little long, so I appreciate the extra. I jokingly say to Clark all the time, if it was up to me, I'd talk to people for 3 hours. But eventually, somebody's got to go to bed on a Sunday night.
he's still awake too. I'm shocked.
Clark, back over to you.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Bo. What a tremendous insight as usual. I think you undersold Scotty's basement just a little bit.
I probably did. Yeah,
I had the pleasure of
I
being
used to
down
sleep
there,
down there though,
being
when I visited. So
just being amazed at looking at everything. And then I think we had to to go to a ball game or maybe to go get wings or something like that. So I want to thank. I know how busy you are. I'm not sure who's busier, you or Arash Madani, our last guest, who was on 109 flights in 2019. So I'm glad we stole you away for an hour before you head away on your 2021 busy scouting schedule. So thanks again, Ryan. Thanks again for another fabulous job. And just a couple of shout outs again to Broken Tees, who sponsored our question and answer portion of the evening. And Steve is our special guest tonight. Broken Tees Apparel will be sending you a golf hat, courtesy of Brendan Harrogate and his company for being with us. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say a brief shout out and a thank you to Tricia Thane Hall. Tricia works with Alumni Relations and Development. She had a very tough week. She lost her father-in-law earlier this week, and she's been the brains and effort behind the scenes on everything we do with this hot stove. And I'm sure everybody on here is getting the links from Tricia, and she's done all the registration. So Tricia, our sympathy to you and your husband and family, and thanks again for everything you do for us here at with Western Hockey Alumni and everything we do, all our events. Last thing, next up on the hot stove is the captain of Vancouver Canucks, Bo Horvat. Obviously, Bo's a very busy man. Obviously, Van is struggling just a little bit right now, so we're waiting to confirm details and a final date with them, but we'll get that to you as soon as we can. We're hoping for the week after next, getting Bo on the Thursday night. I think it's the 11th. So we'll get details to you very soon. Thanks again, everyone. Bo, Ryan, Tricia, and all the viewers. Have a great week. We'll see you next time on the Hot Stove.